As we move into the second phase of this outbreak, we are starting to understand more and more about this virus. We know who is at greatest risk. We know what to do to avoid it. We are also beginning to understand that our fears about this virus are unnecessary. Being cautious is wise. Being fearful is not. Unfortunately, the hysterical media continue to pump out hysteria and deception, and we'll be seeing their clickbait headlines for a while longer. So remember who is engaging in these lies. As we move further into these last days, the fearmongers will only drag you down. So ignore them. Instead, show a dark and dying world what a true follower of Christ really is. Welcome to the ShockCast. I'm John Little, recording on a comfortable Tainan evening on Wednesday, February 12th, 2020. Before going on, hit subscribe and click that bell to receive a notification when the next ShockCast happens. And if you like what you hear, hit that like button. All of that really helps get visibility for Omega Shock and the ShockCast. And if you didn't like it, well, you know what to do. Also, subscribe to the Shock Letter and receive my articles in your inbox at theshockletter.com. You can also find my posts on Facebook and Twitter. I have 2 books that you can read for free, for now, and they're called When Jacob Returns and Ezekiel's Fire. And believe it or not, there are ways to keep the Shock Letter from going to the spam folder by following certain easy instructions. You can find links for all of that below. Now, let's get back to today's topic. The Wuhan coronavirus, some real truth. I am still seeing email and comments from well-meaning people who are sharing the lies and hysteria that are being passed around the internet. People like Steve Quayle, Mike Adams, the Epoch Times, and a host of others are doing great damage by passing on cleverly crafted lies that they claim to be truth. Even generally dependable sites like Zero Hedge have been caught up in this outburst of deceit and fear-mongering. People have lost their minds, and it's time for them to stop doing that. One way to stop going nuts over hysterical headlines is to look at the cold, hard truth. And since you and I are Christians, we are all about the truth, so let's do that. My darling dearest, Mrs. Little is a native Mandarin speaker and involved in certain aspects of the healthcare community here in Taiwan, and she is getting reports from those on the ground in China, from healthcare workers. And there is one thing that is absolutely clear. The Chinese government is lying. And you can always tell when they are lying because their lips are moving. You cannot trust anything that the Chinese government says or anything that is issued through public channels. They are lying, and they are completely without a conscience about their lying. All that they care about is maintaining their power. That's why the Chinese government has engaged in such a huge effort to contain this virus. They literally do not care about who dies from this virus. The health of their population does not matter to them. What they care about is not being blamed for how this virus outbreak was handled. The next time someone comments on the massive amount of effort being expended by the Chinese Communist Party, tell them that this is just kabuki theater. They're just making sure that everyone sees them doing something. And at the same time, they are doing their best to control the narrative. This means that none of the numbers that we are getting from China can be trusted. None of them. Not the death rate, not the survivor rate, not the infection rate. We have almost no way of knowing what is true on the ground in China. The one thing that we have is anecdotal reports from individuals, and it's hard to trust such personal reports because such people can only speak to their own limited circumstances. We have plenty of these reports, and they really tug at the heart. This is a real disaster in China, make no mistake. One avenue of truth that we might have access to are scientific studies by Chinese physicians in hospitals in China. Those reports don't seem to be censored by the CCP, so we might actually be getting some truth there. As time goes on, we'll have a better idea as to the truthfulness of these studies. There is another problem that we are seeing in China, and that is unbelievable corruption. There is widespread theft by minor officials of vital resources. and anything that you personally send to China to help those who are suffering in China will be stolen. They will either steal it for resale on the black market for personal gain, or they will steal it to increase their status within the Chinese Communist Party. So please, do not send anything to China to help those who are suffering. There are ways to help, but only if you go through extremely private channels. You literally need to know someone that you can trust to handle this. There's an example of a YouTube channel that I'm talking about, and it's titled How to Actually Help China from ADV China. Do not give to the Red Cross. Do not give to any organization unless you know that they are impervious to corruption. And that means not even trusting supposedly Christian organizations. There's also something else that I need to say about this corruption, and that is about how the rich are probably taking the lion's share of the resources. I don't have absolute proof of this, but there is a mountain of circumstantial evidence that backs this up. In China, if you have money, you get health care. If you have money, you get special treatment. The poor only get what's left. That's why I'm betting that after this is all over, we'll find that the death rate will have been highest among the poor in China. And that makes me incredibly angry. It should make you angry too. This also means that the response to this virus outbreak will be uneven and extremely inefficient. Corruption has gotten in the way of China's response and made it worse. The other side of this problem has everything to do with resources. Not only are the rich demanding more than their share of the testing kits and hospital beds, but there's a real limit on how many are available. And this means that people with the Wuhan coronavirus are not getting tested, and there are those deaths from this virus that are not being recorded properly. And only some of the blame can be laid at the feet of the morons running China. And yes, they're morons. It was never going to be possible to respond fast enough to this virus. No government will ever be able to contain a virus like this, especially a government run by sycophants and psychopaths. And the task of containing a virus like this is made even harder when psychopaths with too much money are able to break through any quarantine that you set up. We had an example of this here in Taiwan. A plane was privately chartered to medevac those Taiwanese in China who were not infected, but in need of urgent medical care. There were some people in serious need who were going to be on that plane. However, when it landed in Taiwan, we found none of those urgent cases. What we found instead were corrupt Taiwanese businessmen and their families, some of whom were ineligible for entry into Taiwan. And at least one of these businessmen were infected. There literally is no way that we will ever have enough testing kits to discover the true extent of this virus in China. And it is equally impossible for this virus to be contained. There are too many corrupt people with too much money to stop them from arriving on our shores and spreading this infection. The good thing about all of this is that we do have access to accurate data about those with this virus who are outside of China. And we're able to take this data and draw important conclusions that give us some hope that we will all get through this okay. This outbreak will get worse before it gets better, but I suspect that we'll do fine as long as we analyze the situation properly and take reasonable precautions. And that means adequately understanding who is at risk and what you can do. So let's start off with who are really at risk, and we have a lot more data on this than before. This means that we can talk about who needs to be extra careful about this epidemic, and right now that means talking about two groups of people: healthcare workers and the elderly. The anecdotal evidence that is coming in shows that, like the SARS outbreak, doctors, nurses, and hospital staff are the ones who run the highest risk of getting this virus and even dying from it. They're getting the highest concentrations of this virus at a time when they are being overworked and overstressed. This is not a good time to be a healthcare professional in China. The good thing is that the rate of infections among healthcare workers will probably begin to drop now that they are wearing goggles when dealing with patients. Too many hospitals in Wuhan didn't catch on to this need until it was too late for some of their staff. Unfortunately, the other risk group is still in grave danger. The elderly and those in bad health are the ones who are still at risk of contracting and dying from this virus. And reports from some hospitals are showing that the majority of their patients are over the age of 50. One hospital released a study of 138 patients and found that their average age was around 56 years old. Half will be older than that, and half will be younger. And since I'm in my 50s, I take that a little more personally than those of you who are younger. Those who are in their 30s and younger seem to have minor symptoms, if any. We have a case here in Taiwan where 3 family members came down with the Wuhan coronavirus, while a 4th and youngest member of the family had no symptoms at all. But when they tested that 4th family member, they discovered that he was infected. A similar case in Canada had a woman in her 50s coming down with the Wuhan coronavirus while having picked it up from 2 people visiting her from China. Her 2 visitors were in their 30s and had very few symptoms at all. All of this seems to indicate that our children and grandchildren have little to fear from this outbreak. So far, the best analysis on this epidemic can be found here at Coronavirus Epidemic Update Spread Symptoms and Treatment from a YouTube channel called MedCram. Dr. Seholt is a pulmonologist with a gift for communicating complicated information in a way that is easy to understand. If you have concerns about this virus, you need to listen to these YouTube videos. In fact, I recommend that you subscribe to his channel, MedCram, Medical Lectures Explained Clearly. That channel is chock full of excellent information. I subscribed, you should too. Now back to the details about this viral epidemic. When examining who is at risk, I find it truly ironic that those we care about the most are least at risk, and our biggest threat, our children. Those of you with kids know this all too well. When school starts, you know that your children will bring home any of the pathogens running around in your school district. Influenza, the common cold, chicken pox, and homework will all eventually make your own life utterly miserable. But you love your kids, so it's a small price to pay. The good thing is that some governments have figured out that schools are vectors for disease, and they all have plans for shutting them down when outbreaks happen. For instance, here in Taiwan, all schools have been on extended break until late February. This is a very smart move to eliminate a huge transmission route for this disease. Kids aren't very good at following the rules for good hygiene, which is why they keep getting the common cold and the flu and passing them on to those who will be most hurt by it. Kids should not be visiting their grandmother if they have a stuffy nose. Unfortunately, kids can be contagious before symptoms develop, and this is definitely the case for the Wuhan coronavirus. By the time that people are getting symptoms, they have already been spreading this virus, and this is why you must be extra careful when washing your hands. That's right. Wash your hands. That is the single biggest way to avoid getting this bug. Wash your hands and do it for 20 seconds. Disinfectant is good, but it's not as good as good old soap and water when applied vigorously for 20 seconds. Second, make sure that you do not rub your eyes or nose with any part of your hand that has touched any public surface. You can still get this disease if someone sneezes in your face, but that's less common than picking up this infection because you picked your nose. So don't pick your nose in public. Whenever I see someone rub their eyes with their fingertips, I just shake my head. Doing that is a surefire way of getting sick, in addition to sticking your fingers up your nose. Here in Taiwan, it's normal to see lots of people running around with face masks on. That won't really protect you from getting an infection, but it might help you from infecting others. If you have a cough or are sneezing, be a good citizen and wear a face mask. It's the Taiwanese way. The one thing that Taiwanese should do if this virus becomes a problem here is wear goggles. If you see that the virus in your area, you might want to do that. This virus can and will get into your system through your eyes. There are quite a few safety goggles out there that look quite nice and won't make you look like a laboratory reject when you wear them. just remember that they aren't really necessary if the area where you live and work is not suffering an outbreak of the flu, common cold, or this Wuhan coronavirus. I find it ironic that the incidence of influenza and the common cold will undoubtedly be found to have been lower for this year because of the extra precautions that people are taking. And that's a good thing. Then if we can keep doing this, fewer people will come down with the flu every year. All of what I have talked about up to this point gives us a way to weather this pandemic should it get worse. You and I benefit from good health care. We are generally in good health. We have access to good food and clean living conditions. We will probably do fine should the worst happen. But there's one place that will not do fine: Africa. Everything that would help you and me survive this virus is unavailable to the average African. They do not have access to good food and clean living conditions. On average, they are far, far less healthy and already suffer from debilitating epidemics like malaria that leave them open to dying from a virus like this. Worse, we can't know if this virus has arrived in Africa yet. They have very few testing kits and very few medical personnel to respond to any outbreak. The best that they can do is quarantine anyone with a fever arriving at one of their airports. But that just isn't going to be enough. The only thing that might be keeping Africa from getting the Wuhan coronavirus is the fact that none of the corrupt Chinese businessmen fleeing China would ever go to Africa for safe haven. But that won't be enough, since there are plenty of Africans going back and forth between China and Africa, and the Chinese have been deeply involved in resource extraction efforts along with infrastructure projects in Africa. So spare a thought, or even a prayer, for Africa. They are at risk, along with India. Unfortunately, you won't hear the above from the hysterical media. Washing your hands just doesn't sound as sexy as headlines that scream bioweapon and millions dead. And that's a real shame. No, actually, it's shameful. The Wuhan coronavirus is not a bioweapon. 10,000 people are not dying every day from the Wuhan coronavirus. Those in the hysterical media who are passing these lies around should be ashamed of themselves. Those of us with websites and YouTube channels have responsibilities to make sure that we are passing on the truth and not clever fictions. And I am seeing too much of that. If there is a silver lining to this viral outbreak, it's the fact that the hysterical hoaxers have revealed themselves. So take note of the lying liars and avoid them. People that you should be avoiding are Steve Quayle, Doug Hagman of the Hagman Report, Brandon Smith of Alt Market, Mike Adams of Natural News, Before It's News, the website, Dave Hodges of The Common Sense Show. These people probably don't know that they are passing on lies, probably, but I've also noticed that these people aren't very careful about making sure that they are giving you the truth. They don't double-check their sources. They don't hesitate when a story sounds too good to be true. Our job as Christians is to love the truth. This means that we need to be extremely careful to never pass on a lie. And if we should ever send out a lie by mistake, we need to bend over backwards to make sure that this mistake is corrected. It should horrify us if we should ever promote a lie. Unfortunately, the men and websites that I have listed above have all been found to have promoted lies without a shred of remorse. I have caught each and every one of them in a lie, and they have refused to even retract what they said, let alone apologize. And this means that none of them can be trusted. It also means that they are corrupt. I really do not enjoy saying this about people, but those who do not love the truth are dangerous. They might not make up the lies that they peddle, but they are still doing grave damage to those of us who are seeking to warn others about what is coming. Unfortunately, it is one thing to pass on a lie. It is quite another thing to actually create the lies. Then I have found these sites and people to be unflinching creators of lies. Rick Wiles of True News, Debkafile, a website by Giora Shamus, V, the Guerrilla Economist, also known as VG Varghese, the Epoch Times, Hal Turner of the Hal Turner Radio Show, and Great Game India. These people know that they are lying. I've caught them at it, and they are unashamed by their lies. And that lack of conscience over their deception is truly nauseating. We could speculate all day about how they could be so evil, but it really isn't important. And I've already shared some speculations in previous articles and videos. The only one that I have not really talked about is the Epoch Times. That quote-unquote newspaper has been passing on a lot of deception about the Wuhan coronavirus, and I strongly suspect that they are making up a lot of it all by themselves. Why are they deceptive? Well, they are the media arm of the Falun Gong. The Falun Gong are a Buddhist/Taoist mystical cult started by Li Hongzhi in China. He made the mistake of challenging the Chinese Communist Party, which responded in a brutal crackdown that continues today. If you go to China to get an organ transplant, chances are that the organ that you received came from a Falun Gong practitioner that was murdered by the Chinese Communist Party. The Falun Gong might be a cult, and Li Hongzhi might be a moron for having gone up against the Chinese Communist Party. But what China is doing to the Falun Gong is pure evil. And it's understandable that the media arm of the Falun Gong, the Epoch Times, would be interested in painting the Chinese government in as unfavorable a light as possible. Unfortunately, a lie is a lie. And we should never be a party to lies, and that means avoiding the Epoch Times. Then there's a site like Zero Hedge, which has been a generally good site that publishes the kind of information that we all need to know about. Yet they have chosen to fan the flames of hysteria over this virus outbreak. I am disturbed and disgusted by this, and they should know better than to engage in such deceptive journalism. In fact, one of the reasons why the bioweapon hoax got so much traction is precisely due to Zero Hedge republishing a fake article by Great Game India. And they continue to publish articles from that stupid, lying website. And they didn't just republish the article, but they went on to add their own foolish speculations to the hoax. It is my understanding that Zero Hedge has a permanent staff of 3 writers, and the owner of the site is Bulgarian. I suspect that the owner of the site is behind this effort to promote the Great Game India hoax. It has gotten a lot of clicks for Zero Hedge, and that means advertising revenue. So they aren't going to be interested in anything that detracts from the hysteria. Remember that hysteria is an easy way to make money. Just ask the people behind 9/11. The tragedy of this Wuhan coronavirus outbreak is an opportunity to reflect the light of Christ into a dark and dying world. It's also a chance to discover who loves the truth and who does not. It's also your chance to mentally and physically prepare for the time when worse outbreaks arise. As a follower of Christ, your whole life should be about truth, not speculation, not hysteria, truth. And if the people around you cannot see the truth because you have been a peddler of fiction, you have a serious problem. Remember that the unsaved are watching us. They take note of what we do and how we do it. And they will be quick to remember how upset you were over a microscopic bug while claiming that God was your father. If you haven't seen my article about the letter by Pastor Tan Sanghua of Cornerstone Church in Wuhan, now is your chance. It's titled The Wuhan Coronavirus, a Wuhan Pastor Responds. Pastor Tan is a shining example of the kind of Christian that we all must be, trusting God without fear. He knows that God is in control, and he knows that his job is to point precious souls towards the path of eternal life. One day we will all stand before God and be required to give an account of all that we did. All of our works, good and bad, will be judged. If we have tarnished the name of Christ by our actions, we run the risk of suffering great loss of reward for all eternity. I shudder to think of that, and you should too. God set you in this world to show people the way of salvation. No other job is more important than that. It doesn't matter how bad the government is or who is president. It doesn't matter if the stock market crashes or if the world is struck by horrible catastrophe. What matters is the good news of Jesus Christ, and you cannot share that gospel if your reputation has been damaged by lies. That's it for this ShockCast. If you appreciated this video, hit like, then hit subscribe and that little bell. Also, leave a comment. I look forward to seeing what you have to say about what was said here. Your input is truly welcome. You can also get my articles and updates in your inbox through the Shock Letter at theshockletter.com and read my books for free, When Jacob Returns and Ezekiel's Fire. They just might save your life.